Samuel Granger was supposed to be just another face in the crowd until his severed head turned up as a haunted house prop. Ellis Crane was supposed to be a disgraced surgeon in hiding until investigators found his basement full of body parts and surgical journals. What began as a harmless Halloween scare in the quiet town of Milford unraveled into one of the most disturbing true crime cases ever imagined. On October 31, 2019, the small town of Milford was alive with excitement. Halloween in Milford was always a grand event. The streets were filled with children in costumes, houses were decorated with glowing pumpkins and eerie spiderwebs, and every local business joined in on the fun. But this year, something extra special had been planned. Just outside of town, an abandoned barn had been transformed into a haunted house attraction, the first of its kind in Milford. Locals had spent weeks setting it up. Volunteers decorated it with hanging skeletons, creaking floorboards, smoke machines, and fake limbs. Blood-red lighting lit up each room, and eerie recordings of whispers and screams played through hidden speakers. Word spread quickly, and on Halloween night, the line to get in stretched all the way to the gravel road. Inside, the atmosphere was perfect. It was dark, narrow, and disorienting. People screamed, laughed, and stumbled their way through, brushing past hanging ropes and bumping into actors dressed as monsters. Near the end of the path, just before the exit, there was a scene that caught everyone's attention. A table sat under a broken light fixture. On it rested a severed head, eyes open, mouth slightly ajar. The effect was so convincing that people gasped, then laughed, assuming it was the best prop in the entire place. Some even posed with it. A few teenagers took selfies, posting them online with captions like, "Creepiest fake head ever." And Milford's haunted barn doesn't mess around. The head became the star attraction of the night. No one gave it a second thought. By midnight, the final group had gone through. Volunteers locked up the barn and left everything in place, planning to clean up the next morning. When the cleaner arrived just after sunrise, she began tidying up the front of the barn. She swept confetti and picked up discarded candy wrappers. Then she moved to the back rooms. When she reached the final table, something made her stop. The air smelled strange, metallic, sour. At first, she thought it was just leftover stage makeup or something from the fog machines. But as she leaned closer, she realized something was off. The skin didn't look like plastic. It had texture, real pores, real hair, and the eyes, they weren't glass. They looked human. Confused and suddenly nervous, she called the event organizer, who rushed over with another volunteer. Together, they took a closer look. The room went quiet. No one spoke. One of them pulled out a phone and called the police. By the time officers arrived, the haunted house was sealed off, and the severed head was removed for forensic examination. The illusion had worked too well. What everyone thought was a plastic decoration had, in fact, been the remains of a real person. Halloween in Milford would never feel fun again. The town of Milford was in shock. News spread rapidly after police confirmed the horrifying truth: the severed head found in the haunted house was real. The playful, festive spirit that had filled the town only a day earlier had vanished. Fear crept into every conversation, and people began to question how something so gruesome could have gone unnoticed for an entire night. Forensic experts worked quickly. They took fingerprints, dental records, and DNA samples. Within 24 hours, they had an identification: Samuel Granger, age 32. He was a lifelong resident of Milford, known by most locals as a quiet, polite man who worked at the hardware store. He lived alone in a small house just a few blocks from the town center and rarely drew attention to himself. Samuel had been missing for just over 2 weeks, but his absence hadn't caused much concern. He didn't have close family in the area, and his co-workers had assumed he was taking time off or had left town without notice. He wasn't the type to make a fuss, and no one thought to report him missing until now. What disturbed investigators most was the condition of the head. It had been cleanly severed from the body with precision. The cut was smooth, without the ragged tearing usually seen in violent crimes. This led detectives to believe the killer might have surgical knowledge or experience with butchery. It wasn't a rushed act, it had been done carefully, almost professionally. With this in mind, police treated the haunted barn as an active crime scene. They sealed off the area and brought in cadaver dogs and forensic specialists. After several hours of searching, they discovered something hidden behind a loose wooden panel in the back wall of the barn. Stuffed into a narrow cavity were blood-soaked tarps, a pair of latex gloves, and a set of sharp, stainless steel knives. Each item was carefully bagged and sent to the lab for analysis. None of the volunteers who helped set up the haunted house could explain how these tools ended up there. The area where the items were found had been closed off before the setup began. It was supposed to be just a storage nook, and no one recalled opening it. The discovery of the knives only deepened the mystery. Whoever had done this knew how to work in silence and darkness. They hadn't just killed someone, they had planned for the remains to be found in the middle of a public event. The killer had placed the head where hundreds would see it, turning their crime into a twisted performance. As fear spread through Milford, police began digging deeper into Samuel Granger's past. Was this a random act, or had someone been watching him all along? As investigators continued piecing together the circumstances surrounding Samuel Granger's death, the case took an unexpected turn. Just days after the head was identified and the barn searched, two families from nearby towns contacted Milford authorities. They had seen the story on the news and recognized something familiar. Both had missing relatives who had vanished under eerily similar conditions. No signs of struggle, no goodbye notes, just sudden disappearances within the last month. The first was Dylan Reese, a 28-year-old freelance photographer who had been traveling through rural areas capturing images of abandoned buildings. He had last texted a friend to say he was passing through Milford and had found a creepy old barn he wanted to shoot. That message was sent on October 10, 12 days before the haunted house opened. The second was Clara Newton, a 41-year-old teacher who had been hiking in the woods outside of Milford with the intention of camping overnight. Her last known location, according to GPS data from her phone, was less than a mile from the barn. The disappearances had not been connected at the time. Different towns, no clear link. But now, with Samuel Granger's head discovered inside the haunted house and these new pieces falling into place, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Something was happening in Milford, and it had started long before Halloween night. Detectives revisited security footage, phone pings, and traffic cams. One officer suggested analyzing drone footage that had been recorded by a local news outlet covering the Halloween festival. Most of it was wide shots of the town and the barn, used for promotional content. But one clip stood out. It showed the barn just as evening began. Near the side exit, partially hidden in the shadows, stood a tall figure dressed in a tattered black cloak and a crude mask that looked like it had been sewn from patches of leather. At first glance, the figure seemed like a performer. But as the video was slowed down and enhanced, something chilling became clear. Dark fluid was dripping from the bottom of the figure's cloak. It wasn't fake blood. Experts later confirmed it matched the appearance of human blood under infrared light. This raised an unsettling possibility. The killer might have been there inside the haunted house the entire night, surrounded by crowds, screams, and distractions. Guests had unknowingly brushed shoulders with someone who had likely murdered multiple people and carefully inserted their remains into the event. Authorities launched a wider investigation into other unsolved disappearances in the surrounding counties. It became evident that Milford was not an isolated case. The town had become part of something larger, something much more terrifying. And somewhere out there, the person responsible was still watching. The investigation expanded rapidly, with the possibility of multiple victims and a killer who had walked unnoticed among crowds. Authorities knew they were racing against time. The blood-stained tools, the leather mask, and the mounting list of missing persons pointed to someone methodical and experienced. The clean dismemberment, the strategic placement of the head, and the boldness of using a public event as a stage, none of it was impulsive. It was calculated. Then came a crucial lead. A nurse at Milford General Hospital contacted detectives after recognizing the mask from news coverage. She remembered a man from several years ago, Dr. Ellis Crane, a once prominent surgeon whose medical license had been revoked following a malpractice investigation. He had been accused of tampering with cadaver samples, stealing organs from unclaimed bodies, and exhibiting strange behavior in the hospital's morgue. Though charges never stuck due to insufficient evidence, the hospital cut ties with him, and he disappeared from public life. Dr. Crane had once lived in a large, isolated farmhouse just 5 miles from the barn. Rumors about him had swirled in town for years. Some said he had mental breakdowns after his suspension. Others claimed he practiced on animals in his basement. But without concrete proof, his name faded from memory. With a search warrant in hand, officers approached the property. The yard was overgrown, the windows boarded, and the door reinforced with chains. After forcing entry, they were hit by a wave of decay and rot. Inside, the house was cluttered with old newspapers, surgical books, and medical tools. The electricity still worked, but only barely. Flickering lights revealed walls marked with strange drawings, anatomical sketches mixed with symbols and handwritten notes. The basement door was padlocked from the outside. When it was finally opened, officers descended into darkness. What they found confirmed their worst fears. The basement had been transformed into a surgical chamber. Stainless steel tables sat under hanging lights. Freezers lined one wall, each one labeled with initials and dates. Inside were vacuum-sealed bags containing human tissue, organs, limbs, even full torsos. Some were recent, others had clearly been there for years. Jars filled with preserved specimens stood on shelves next to medical textbooks stained with what looked like dried blood. In one corner was a chair, and on it sat a mannequin-like figure. It wore a leather mask, hand-stitched and discolored. The stitching matched the mask seen in the drone footage. Surrounding the mannequin were Polaroid photographs of people, some identified, others not. Some were still listed as missing, but Ellis Crane was gone. No body, no footprints, no sign of struggle. Just the chilling evidence of someone who had lived in the dark for far too long and who had likely planned for this moment all along. Weeks passed with no sign of Ellis Crane. Despite the evidence found in his home, it was as if he had vanished into thin air. Authorities released his photo nationwide, and a manhunt began across multiple states. Tips poured in, but none led anywhere. His face became one of the most recognized in the country, yet no one could find him. People feared he had already started again somewhere else, blending into another quiet town, preparing for something worse. Then, on a cold morning in December, nearly 2 months after the haunted house discovery, a man was arrested for trespassing on private property in rural Wyoming. He had been found wandering through a ranch, filthy and disoriented. He gave a false name, claimed to be looking for shelter, and said he had no identification. But when the local sheriff took his fingerprints, a match lit up the federal database. It was Ellis Crane. His appearance had changed significantly. He had shaved off all his hair, including his eyebrows. Scars marked his cheeks, possibly self-inflicted to alter his face. His teeth had been filed down. The transformation was disturbing, but not enough to fool biometric data. When brought in for questioning, Crane refused to speak. He stared blankly at the wall, blinking slowly, unmoved by photographs of the victims or the gruesome evidence from his home. He answered no questions, offered no defense, and remained completely silent. But his backpack told a story he would not. Inside were several alarming items. First, a handmade mask stitched leather, nearly identical to the one found in the basement. Second, a small notebook filled with disturbing illustrations. Each page was detailed with anatomical drawings, body measurements, and lists of names. Most horrifying of all were the notes scrawled along the margins. Phrases like "they are only parts" and "perfection comes in pieces." At the end of the notebook, one sentence had been repeated over and over: "The head was just the beginning." The notebook also contained a hand-drawn map. It marked remote areas across several states, many with no labels or roads. Authorities used it to begin fresh searches, and within days, remains were found buried in shallow graves near one of the marked locations. Bones, personal items, and even full skeletons were unearthed. Forensic teams began the long process of identification. It became clear that Samuel Granger had been the final piece of a long series of killings. Crane had been experimenting, studying, and collecting victims for years. He didn't just kill, he curated. The town of Milford would never return to normal. The haunted house was torn down. Locals held vigils for the victims, and new families came forward, hoping to find closure. But the truth was darker than anyone had feared. Ellis Crane hadn't lost control, he had been in control the entire time.